I am Donna Beckman, the Advocacy and Outreach Director for the North Carolina Down Syndrome Alliance, or the NCDSA, and I would like to welcome you to the North Carolina Down Syndrome Virtual Speaker Series. It is hosted by NCDSA in collaboration with Coastal Buds, the Down Syndrome Network of Onslow and Carteret Counties, the Down Syndrome Network of Greater Greensboro, the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Winston-Salem, the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Charlotte, and High Country Buddy Walk. I'd like everybody to know that the North Carolina Down Syndrome Virtual Speaker Series is held on the third Wednesday of the month at 7:30, and it is free. There will be a deviation from the date for December. Registration opens the first of the month before the presentation. So you can now register, as some of you already have done, for the September session. The October session will not be online for registration until September 1st. And a very important thing, so I stopped getting emails from people, registration closes Monday night before the presentation so that I can get you the link to the webinar the day before and you can have the information you need. Tonight's webinar is being recorded, and due to any issues with the technology, you will receive a follow-up email next week with a link to the video and the PowerPoint slides for tonight. Tonight or tomorrow, you will receive an email with a brief survey. Please take 1 or 2 minutes to answer the questions on the survey. I think there's only 5 or 6 of them. We do have auto-generated captions available if enabled, if you want to click that on for yourself. And since it is already 7:35, I want to welcome you to tonight's webinar, the North Carolina General Assembly 2023 session, and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is being presented by Corye Dunn of Disability Rights North Carolina, and I would like to welcome Corye and thank her for sharing her expertise on this very important subject. Corye, thank you very much for being here. The show is yours.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks for inviting me. Hey, everybody, I see some familiar names and can't see anyone's faces, but I see familiar names among the attendees, and I'm pleased to see y'all here tonight. I am Corye Dunn. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Disability Rights North Carolina. I've been there 12 years, so I've worked with a lot of you, and am excited to share some information with you tonight and hopefully help y'all be even better advocates than you already are. We are all always growing in our advocacy roles, so I hope that's a goal that you share with me, that we're all trying to be better advocates all the time. So we've just called this webinar the legislative session so far, because of course when Donna invited me to present tonight, we really thought that we would be at the end of the legislative session, and we are not. The House is meeting as we speak, and so I'll talk a little bit about where we are, but there will be an opportunity for questions. You are welcome to enter your questions in the Q&A section at the top of your screen. If you put it in the chat, it may not be seen. If you put it in the Q&A, Donna will definitely see it, and it's much more likely to get answered. And if you, for some reason, would prefer or need to ask your question out loud, if as an accommodation you need to ask your question verbally, that's fine, but let Donna know that, okay? And from there, I will. Also, if you have any technical issues, Donna is bravely a one-woman tech show tonight, so the two of us will try and make things work as smoothly as possible, but we appreciate your patience. All right, so the legislative session so far. I'm with Disability Rights North Carolina. For those of you who haven't worked with us, Disability Rights North Carolina is a legal advocacy agency that fights for the rights of people with disabilities in North Carolina. DRNC is the federally mandated protection and advocacy for North Carolina, which means we handle cases involving discrimination, abuse, and other rights violations. All of our services are offered at no cost to North Carolinians with disabilities. We're a private, independent 501c3 nonprofit and also a member of the National Disability Rights Network. I like to tell folks that we serve folks across disability category, across the lifespan, and across settings. So whether you are a person with low vision in first grade, or you are a person with an autoimmune disease in your 90s, we're your people. And I think you'll see that reflected in some of the work that we do here when we talk about the legislature, because I think a lot of folks know us from one piece of our work or another, but we really do have a very broad range of issues that we work on. So let's talk a little bit about the basics of legislative advocacy. In North Carolina, the legislative body is the North Carolina General Assembly. There are links, you're going to get these slides. There are links here. You don't need to take notes, it's going to come to you. But each of these underlined portions here is a link. So if you want to look up a bill and you know the number, I have shared the link to do that. It's the bill lookup function. Now, if you don't know a bill number, then you're going to need to go to another spot where you can search by keyword or subject matter. There's also a link here for you to actually, excuse me, watch committee meetings. They are now live streamed on YouTube for the most part. Not every one of them, but the vast majority of them now, or certainly all the Health and Human Services and Medicaid and Education, fewer of the smaller committees, but a lot of them are there. There are links to the dashboards for the House and the Senate. And I'm going to go to these links in just a minute, but I'm going to walk through what is going to be here for you when you come back to look at it for yourself. Dashboards are frankly a revolution since I've been doing this work. You used to have to actually keep up with a printed list of bills for the day and scratch out the ones that were pulled and scribble in the ones that were added. The dashboard is an actual up-to-date, up-to-the-minute electronic record of what's being considered on the floor of the House or the Senate on any given day, which is fantastic. When I started this work, there was no Wi-Fi in the legislative building. There wasn't even an audio feed for most committees, much less a video feed. It certainly wasn't on YouTube. You had to go to the legislative website and stream it from there directly. And the bill research functions were not as robust. So to me, it feels like we have come light years in the last 12 years in terms of public availability of information. Of course, a lot of that was sped up by the COVID pandemic, where even legislators weren't going to make it into the building. And so in order to get anything done, they had to figure out some tech solutions that they hadn't previously embraced. So today, for example, in the House Rules Committee, members, even though they were in session in person, there were members who attended remotely and fully participated and spoke up and talked about whether they had their amendments. So the General Assembly has really embraced the use of technology over the last 3 years in a way that I don't know if I thought it was going to happen during my career at all. It was so slow for a long, long time. So I have links to all of these tools right here, and we'll talk more about how you might use them or why you might use them. And then just to the full North Carolina General Assembly website. The General Assembly website gives you a ton of information. It has the legislative calendars for the day. It has the upcoming committee meetings. You can find what bills are set to be heard in any given meeting. Now, it may not be up to the minute accurate, and you may not be able to find everything you want to find, but it is a far cry from where it was a decade ago. If you're new to this work, the North Carolina General Assembly operates on a 2-year biennial budget cycle. So planning for the biennium happens in the long session, that is this year. So all odd numbered years are a long session, and it's truly a long session this year. Those usually start in January or February, and then they go until they're done. The even numbered years are short sessions, and those can be 2 to 6 months long. It really just depends on what else they have going on in terms of litigation, elections, and other issues back home. It used to be, the long session used to be significantly shorter, but it's run, last long session and this long session have both been quite long. The last two really never left. They just basically would suspend activity for a period of weeks and then come back and do a little bit of work and go back home again. So the fact that they can work remotely more than they used to actually makes it a little easier for them to just keep the session going. So for what it's worth, that might be a little bit of a downside to the adoption of technology. So the fiscal year, that is the year for the state's budget, which is the biggest thing that the General Assembly does, is July 1 through June 30th of each year. So we are a little over a month into the first year of the biennium, and we do not have a budget. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but we're operating under continuing resolutions right now. And I want to talk a little bit about what it means to work inside of a supermajority. So if you read the news, you probably know that the North Carolina General Assembly is controlled by a supermajority of Republican elected officials. So the leadership in both the House and the Senate are Republican, and in both chambers, there's a sufficient margin of majority in favor of Republicans that it is, if everyone voted along party lines, it would be impossible to sustain a gubernatorial veto. So they can override any gubernatorial veto if everyone votes along party lines. And that's exactly what they're doing this week. There have been a lot of veto override votes this week. So working in a supermajority means that the minority party, in this case the Democrats, have very little power or control, and so they're not chairing committees. Their bills are often not heard or don't move swiftly through the process, and their amendments are rarely adopted. Before this, I was watching the House debate of the elections bill on the floor, and there's just a series of Democratic amendments, all of which are voted down. So it's living in a supermajority means that a lot of the decisions can be made really outside of the public eye, because they can all happen in the caucus meetings. They don't have to happen in committee meetings or on the floor of the chamber. They can make decisions within their party and then carry it out on the floor of the chamber without needing to talk to anyone from the opposing party. That's just how the math works. Donna, I'm seeing no questions at this point. I'm going to stop right here and suggest that if there is one thing you are hoping that we'll talk about tonight, that you go ahead and put that in the Q&A so that we don't get to the end and then realize we have really big questions that we haven't gotten to yet. That would be a big help to me so that I make sure that we're actually spending this time the way that you all need to spend it, the way that it's most beneficial to you. Because I can talk about the legislature all day, any day. It's what I do. And we have the first. Carol, when will redistricting be complete? And that's a question I have no idea what the answer is. Yeah, I mean, so we'll also talk more about this, but the things that are taking up the most air in the room, the things that are taking up the most energy, bandwidth, resources, attention, are not issues that are squarely what most of us would think of as disability issues, and certainly not specifically Down syndrome specific issues. They are things like redistricting, where there was a recent Supreme Court case that made it clear that we're going to have to redistrict again. So, we have no idea when it's going to happen. It will not be before September. It may not be for much longer than that. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we as Disability Rights North Carolina works on at the legislature, because it's much broader than I think most folks realize. We work on education. That means K through 12 and post-secondary education. The issues related to disability in both K-12 and post-secondary are enormous and very broad, and they range from school discipline to exclusion from school to adequate funding for disability-related supports and services. And then in post-secondary education, you know, we often forget that all of the states, I think we as a state sometimes forget that all of our services and government functions affect the lives of people with disabilities. And so it's really important to make sure that our community colleges, our university system, our vocational training are all meeting the needs of people with disabilities as well as other North Carolinians. Healthcare. So that includes Medicaid. So Medicaid is just like one fraction of just healthcare. Healthcare also includes insurance oversight and issues, including how to comply with federal law, and then oversight of facilities and providers that the state, that state function of oversight. Those are really big, broad sets of responsibilities of state government. And so while Medicaid is incredibly important, as are state-funded services, they are just one piece of a much bigger healthcare puzzle. We work a lot in the judiciary committees. So we work on things related to criminal justice, corrections, juvenile justice, court accessibility, and guardianship, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. We have a particular funding stream, a particular federal grant that is dedicated exclusively to the voting rights of people with disabilities. And so we do a lot of work on elections and voting, which is why I was watching the House debate on the elections bill before joining you tonight. Housing, which we all know is a critical issue for our whole state and is especially important for people with disabilities that really need for there to be an adequate supply of affordable, accessible housing of all types. And really anything else that impacts the rights of people with disabilities. I'm constantly amazed at the number of state agencies and issues that we get to work on, which is really incredibly fun and also very challenging to be able to advise legislators in a meaningful way, in a well-informed way on that broad range of issues. People with disabilities are everywhere, so DRNC is too. That's how we think about our work. And it's certainly how we think about our work at the General Assembly. Like I said, we don't have a budget, which is, you know, frustrating, mostly because you'll see here that I have I've added a picture of Charlie Brown trying to kick the football as Lucy pulls it away from him, like she did every time she held the football for him. That is how I feel about the fact that the last 2 or 3 long sessions, the General Assembly has said, oh, it's going to be a short one. We're going to be out of here. We're going to be out of here into June. This year, we actually believed them. And so I'm feeling a little like Charlie Brown. They're not even close to done. They aren't even going to handle the budget until September. And then redistricting will happen sometime after that. And who knows what else they'll take up. They're currently working through veto overrides and some other things that were just kind of stacked up in the queue. But I really don't know how long they'll be in session, and they may just continue to dismiss for a few weeks and come back throughout the year. So a lot of the things that I'd hoped to talk to you all about tonight, things like direct support professional wages and career development, innovations waiver slots, school funding that will allow for students with disabilities to remain in school and not be excluded, those things are going to be in the budget in all likelihood. So we know that the House and Senate, neither one allocated nearly enough money for innovation waiver slots. 250 in one chamber, 350 in the other. That will not even keep up with the growth in the waiver wait list. And so what we do know is that whatever number they give us in the end will not be enough, and will not meet the need of our community, and will absolutely not stop the growth of the currently 17,000 member registry of unmet need that is sort of the waiting area for robust services or more robust services. We also know that innovations waiver slots and state-funded services are meaningless without people to perform those services. And so we have to fix DSP wages, and we need for there to be a career pathway for direct support professionals. And we just saw today that North Carolina is the worst state in the country for long-term suspension of students with disabilities. And unless and until we adequately fund schools and make it possible for schools to have the resources to keep kids in the classroom, we're going to continue to see students with disabilities excluded for behaviors that are a manifestation of their disability, whether that violates federal law or not. So, so those are some things that I had hoped to spend more time on tonight, but we just don't have any more information at this point. But with that said, I wanna talk more about Medicaid, because what we do have are a lot of open questions about what's happening. I think most of you know that Medicaid expansion passed. You may not know that Medicaid expansion was set to only go into effect when the budget was passed. So no budget equals no Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is about the 600,000 or so people who are currently uninsured and in the gap between current Medicaid eligibility and eligibility for subsidy on the federal marketplace. That's because the federal law was written assuming that states would expand Medicaid so that if you had below a certain income, you would get Medicaid and you didn't need to be eligible for subsidies. Well, those people are not eligible for subsidies, and we haven't yet fully expanded Medicaid, so they just don't have health care. Not what any of us wanted to see. And so when we get a budget, we will also have Medicaid expansion completed. Now, The statement recently from the Department of Health and Human Services was that Medicaid expansion, if they had a budget by September 1st, then we could have Medicaid expansion October 1st. But if it took any longer than that, it would be at least December 1st before we could fully enact Medicaid expansion and start really enrolling the people who are newly eligible. We will not have a budget by September 1st. So we will not have Medicaid expansion until at least December, and I would not hold my breath for December. So that is for any of you whose families and loved ones are holding on for Medicaid expansion, it is going to be longer, and I'm so sorry. I've not seen any momentum, any will to move toward decoupling Medicaid and the budget, Medicaid expansion and the budget, which was sort of the other alternative that the Department of Health and Human Services put forth. I haven't seen that. Discussion has not been made public at the very least. So that's just Medicaid expansion. That, of course, doesn't even touch on the myriad other Medicaid issues we have going on. So let's talk about tailored plans. Tailored plans are the next iteration of managed care for people with IDD, serious mental illness, SUD, substance use disorder, and traumatic brain injury. Those are the plans that are to be managed by the current LME MCOs, who will also continue to manage the state funds just as they have all along as LMEs. There has been a lot of discussion about reducing the total number of LME MCOs. The department has expressed a preference for 4 total MCOs, which would likely mean Sandhills and East Point would be absorbed, the counties they serve would be absorbed into other MCOs. That is me saying that that is the likely outcome. That is not the department's position. What we've seen instead is that Sandhills and East Point have made a proposal to join, which would leave us with 5 MCOs rather than 4. So we currently have 6. Sandhills and East Point would join together to leave us with 5 as their proposal, but the department and many legislators and leadership have said 4 is the right number. All of that has to do with how many people you have to be serving, what they would call covered lives, how many people you have to be serving for a tailored plan to be sustainable. And that is some behind the scenes math that I can't fully explain, but that I think there is it is very real that you have to have a certain number of covered lives to be able to make this work. And we have long said that people with disabilities should have a choice. And we haven't gotten to that point yet, but I think the fewer MCOs we have, the easier it is to move toward choice. And the more people with disabilities are able to act as a real market force on the MCOs. At the moment, none of us have any choice, and we are assigned based on our county of Medicaid eligibility, and that's it. That's the end of the story. So stay tuned. We don't know if we will end up with 4 or 5 or 6 MCOs by the end of the year. We do not know. And until that's settled, there's no way we can talk about tailored plan implementation. Tailored plan implementation had to be halted because the MCOs had not yet developed sufficient networks of providers on the physical health side. Because in addition to the IDD, SUD, mental health, TBI services that they currently manage, under tailored plans, they will also be managing physical health services. So they'll be just like any healthcare insurance that you might get through an employer, for example. handling your primary care providers and your specialists and your hospitalization. That can't happen without a network of providers on the physical health side. And part of the barrier to developing those networks has been that there are 6 of them, and none of them are powerful enough to get all the right providers to sign up with them. So I think it is the hope of the department that fewer MCOs would be in a position to build more robust networks. Not to put words in their mouths, but I think that that's a fair characterization of what they've been saying. And but we've seen almost no improvement in the depth of the provider panels for the tailored plans since, for months. So it's a real problem. We could not have gone live with a system that just didn't have enough hospitals or primary care providers or OBGYNs or, neurologists in the network. There's just no way to serve people without the providers in the network. The willingness to pay for services doesn't matter if there's no one to provide the services. Same problem as on the DSP side. All right, that was tailored plans. I want to encourage y'all to think about whether you have specific tailored plan questions while I take just a second to take a look at the question and answer section. All right, so Christy Moore asked, in light of Medicaid expansion, do you know what's being done to increase the number of providers who accept Medicaid and or the number of Medicaid beneficiaries they accept? The only thing that's going to fix, well, there are 2 things that will improve this. One is improving rates, which we've heard the department say that they want to do, but we really have to see an improvement in rates in order for more providers to feel like it is worth their time and energy to serve Medicaid enrollees. 2 is that we have to actually build the pipeline, right? So in addition to paying people once they are in practice, we've also got to beef up things like our safety net healthcare centers, our support of graduate medical education. We've got to incentivize people to go into underserved areas. And frankly, we're going to need to incentivize people to come to our state at all because we're not training nearly enough healthcare professionals overall. And as I understand it, that's by far the worst. The gap between what we have and what we need is going to be the worst at the sort of lower levels of nurse credentialing. So certified nursing assistant and licensed practical nurse are the 2, that's the associate degree nursing and the less than associate degree nursing function. Those 2 categories are deeply under-resourced, but RN and advanced practice nursing are also, bachelor's nursing and advanced practice nursing are all way under where we need them. And that doesn't even get started on PAs and physicians and all of the other healthcare professions, allied health professions that radiate out from there. I don't think we have that solved at all, Christy, not even close. Mary Ryder asked what happened to the North Carolina court case in which I believe a judge ruled that North Carolina has to step it up and immediately meet the needs of all people on the registry of unmet needs. Also, didn't a North Carolina congressman ask to just pass the Medicaid part of the budget so it could move forward? So I'll start with the court case you mentioned. I think you're referring to the Samantha R case. That's a case that our organization brought against the state of North Carolina for violations of the rights of people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities. And it would have required the state to clear the waiting list in 10 years. The state has appealed that order. The order was issued by a judge, a state court judge, Alan Bador. And that decision has been appealed to the North Carolina Court of Appeals by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So they, in addition to clearing the wait list in 10 years, there were some other provisions, but basically all but a very small bit of it, including the waiver provisions, have been appealed. So we are waiting on the appeal. There is mediation scheduled. Our Court of Appeals process is such that there's an automatic opportunity for mediation before an appellate hearing. And so that mediation, I believe, is scheduled for some time in the next month or so. And then, and it was appealed in January or December. So we expect it'll be heard if the mediation, if it doesn't resolve at mediation, then it will still likely be heard by the end of this calendar year, maybe. And I don't think that we have a panel assigned. There's a 3-judge panel for appellate hearings, and I don't think we have a panel assigned yet for that appeal. Annette also has some questions about, I just got a notice that the House will take no votes in the next 2, maybe 3 weeks. So anything you're waiting on in the House, no time soon. So if LMEs go away in 5 years, who's going to pick up all the state-funded programs they do? Private insurance surely will not. So I'm going to give some context to Annette's question, which is a good one. So like I said, the LMEs, which are LME MCOs as a consolidated entity. LME stands for local management entity, what used to be an area authority. And they are responsible for administering the state dollar portion of our public mental health, behavioral health, DD, SUD, TBI services. There is no provision for what would happen with those dollars in current law if the LME MCOs do not continue to exist after the first round of tailored plan contracting. And I'll tell you why that matters. The tailored plans are the only entities that could bid on tailored plans this round were LME MCOs. And they are the only ones who, under current law, could run these plans for the first few years. After that time, other entities would be allowed to bid to offer those same plans. So that could mean that insurance companies would be administering tailored plans. There is no provision in the law for what would happen to the state-funded portion of services, whether there would be some sort of skeleton crew of LME just to administer those services, or if they might get reverted back to the state and then the state has to administer them directly. We really have no idea, Annette, what would happen if the LME MCOs are not successful at administering tailored plans and surviving after the first round of contracts. And then there's another question about eligibility under Medicaid expansion. The Department of Health and Human Services is going to be publishing all of those income and asset level rules. And so as soon as we get it enacted into law, so we get the budget or a decoupling and the department can move forward with its planning, we will get that kind of information from them, and we and other advocacy organizations will share it as widely as we possibly can. And also every DSS office will have it. DSS offices are the ones who will continue to do the assessment for eligibility. And so, so if you already have a DSS point of contact, that's who you're going to go to anyway. So as for Medicaid expansion impacting disability services, what it really means is that people who currently don't have access to Medicaid and who fall into that gap will have access to Medicaid, which is fantastic. We know that there are a lot of people who are working poor, who work but don't have access to employer provided health insurance. Maybe they piece together 2 or 3 part-time jobs, or maybe their employer offers access to insurance, but only with a really substantial payment, and their wages aren't enough to support them actually accessing that health care. So there are a lot of folks with disabilities in the workforce who are going to be eligible under Medicaid expansion, which we think is fantastic. Couldn't be happier about that. It may not change our actual disability services sector, the way we think of it, like the stuff over at the LME MCOs. It may not change much of that at all. It's not going to change the array of services that's available. What will change the array of services that is available is the 1915I option. 1915I, it's just named after a section of the Social Security Act. So don't feel like you need to like understand it. It's not a code. It's literally just a piece of the law. We call it 1915I. Basically, that's a way that the state plans to add or is adding a bunch of services, respite, in-home supports, and employment supports, support employment to the state plan, so that if you are Medicaid eligible, even if you don't have a waiver slot, you can access those services. But you have to be enrolled in Medicaid to get those 1915I services. So they're like, a few of the waiver services available to people on Medicaid without a waiver slot. It means it'll be available to people who do not meet the ICF level of care measure, which is the current eligibility measure for the Innovations Waiver. It also means that it will be available to people who have, who do meet that level of care, but who might be waiting for another decade for a waiver slot. It could mean the world to stabilizing families and keeping families from having to consider placement choices that they really don't want to consider. Annette also asked about how effective the IDD Caucus will be to improve policy and programs this year versus just health leadership or appropriations. I think having an IDD Caucus is really important and valuable. I think that caucus is still learning what it can and can't get done. And so I don't know how much they'll get done this year. I was frankly disappointed to see the numbers of waiver slots that came out of the House and Senate budgets, 250 and 350 respectively. So if we were measuring by that, I would say not a lot, but I don't think that's the only measure. And I think they are finding their feet. And I think that we need to keep sharing our stories with them as a community to help them understand what we actually need. And waiver slots are certainly high on the list, but they aren't everything. Carol has a question about green card holders and IDD services, and I do not know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I get confused. I get immigration law mixed up a little bit. There is no, so basically the public charge rule was pulled back. So there shouldn't be a bar to citizenship on the basis of accessing services. But I don't know that your friendly neighborhood immigration attorney would tell you the same thing. I would say you're going to need to talk to an immigration attorney about the potential impact of accessing any kind of services during the naturalization process. Does Medicaid reimburse providers for interpreters? That's such a lovely question. I'm so glad you asked. There is now a billable, a billing code for providers to bill for accommodations, including interpreting services. I do not know the full scope of what that code can be used for, because I actually haven't talked to anyone who's used it yet. But getting that code created was a huge heavy lift and took years of work, especially from the deaf and hard of hearing community, to make it happen. So, so if you know folks who would benefit, in particular from ASL interpreting. Now, if you're talking about other spoken language interpreting, I actually don't know if that code is eligible for that. I do know that it's eligible or it's usable for ASL interpreting, but I haven't read the billing code itself enough to know what the boundaries of it are. But if you know someone who could benefit from ASL interpretation, please let them know so that they can share with their providers that that's now an option. Okay, Michelle asked a question about case number and county, and I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to, so maybe you could flesh that one out a little bit more for me. All right. Annette says, it seems a lack of business acumen knowledge by legislators or state leadership causes grief for both providers and LME-MCOs maintain their fiduciary responsibility, i.e. fund balances. Remember the $500 million pullback into general fund. The service side needs to be sustained. Okay, not a question, but I've read it for the group. And Beth says, what are specific issues related to the waiver that impact the Down syndrome community, Medicaid, Innovations Waiver, Guardianship, that families should be focused on and when? I'm going to come back to Guardianship in just a minute. I'm really excited actually about a bill that is on its way to the finish line that we've been working on for 7 or 8 years now. Annette also asked, it's been sole source since 2012. Why open it up for competitive? I think you mean bids now. And I think you mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're referring to the contracts with the LME-MCOs to administer MHDD, SUD, TBI services. That is a very good question. I think there have been a number of incidents that have caused legislators' faith in MCOs to falter. And so it's not like the decision was just made today. It was actually made a few years ago to have that. My sense of time before and after the beginning of the pandemic is really terrible. I apologize for that. But the decision was made several years ago to move toward tailored plans, and that after one round of protecting the LME-MCOs in their ability to be the only bidders for tailored plans, that they would expand that eligibility beyond LME-MCOs. And I think that happened in 19, but I wouldn't swear to it. Do I know the code? I don't know what that means. Oh, I'm sorry. Michelle was asking for the case site for the Samantha R case. Yeah, I'll send all of that. And actually, Donna, if you can help me remember, I'll actually send a link to our page about the Samantha R case. It has our filings, the state's filings, some news articles, some stories about people who are the plaintiffs in the case, and you can read it all for yourself. And it's, I think it's pending. I think it was filed in Wake County because the state is the defendant. So that's usually the case, but I could be wrong about that. Oh, the billing code. Linda got the billing code. Good. That's the code you meant. HCPCS T1013. Thank you for not making me look that up. We've found that other states, Michigan, won't accept out-of-state Medicaid other than ER services. That's absolutely true. Medicaid is perhaps the least portable form of health insurance. And so I would not count on being able to use it outside of North Carolina, and I wouldn't count on being able to use it inside of North Carolina if your eligibility is in another state. Google. Yes. Google's your friend, Linda. Thank you. Do you think that IDD will receive any funds in the $1.6 billion Medicaid expansion, behavioral health, mental health initiative? God, I hope so. We're still not 100% clear about what the spending for that money looks like. But as you point out, people with IDD have non-IDD related needs. Imagine that. People with IDD need physical health care and mental health care, and sometimes have substance use disorders or acquire traumatic brain injuries. People don't live in these artificial silos that we've invented in our healthcare system. That's just not real. And the people I always worry about the most in our system are the ones who live across the boundaries of those silos. So people who are deaf and have mental health related needs, people who have IDD and a substance use disorder, people who need services that live in different silos, and the providers aren't necessarily prepared to serve them appropriately. Those are always the clients I worry about the most, and the ones that our system is least well developed to serve. And so I so hope that the state is going to invest in building our mental health system's capacity to serve people with other kinds of disabilities and conditions. And with that, I want to go on to guardianship, because I thought Medicaid might eat up a lot of the air in the room, as it almost always does. So I'd like to go back to, that was our question time. Actually going to stop sharing and pull up a different site. So I want to talk a little bit about guardianship. I wish I could do like show of hands on here. I don't think I can do that. But I know that many of you are familiar with guardianship proceedings. I know that many of you have been counseled that you must get guardianship, that you can't get guardianship, that you should always get guardianship, that you should never get guardianship. There's so much bad information out there. But of all the folks I know who work in the system, I think there is a growing consensus that we as a state, as North Carolina, really overuse guardianship. We overuse all kinds of restrictive interventions, involuntary commitments, guardianship, you name it. If there's an overly restrictive intervention, we'll find a way to use it. So guardianship is effectively the legal substitution of one person's judgment for another. That's what it is. It's about decision making. And we have relied on it for far more than that. We see people who are placed under guardianship because they really need assistance navigating our complicated service system. Anyone who has tried to navigate our service system can tell you that with or without a guardian, it's a bear. And guardians don't get like a special phone number to call, right? It's just the same messy system with an additional person involved. And sometimes not even an additional person, just, a different title. guardians can't actually control the behavior of the people they're supporting. You know, there's this notion, I think, and I think it especially happens in courtrooms where clerks of court acting as judges in guardianship cases are trying to do their very best to keep someone healthy or safe, and they can't imagine doing nothing. And guardianship is the measure that's on the table, and so they take the measure that's offered to them and say, yes, let's choose guardianship. But what's really at issue is that someone doesn't like the behavior, the risk tolerance of the person with disabilities at issue, right? And so someone is perhaps drinking more than, let's say, a family member thinks is advisable. A guardian is gonna be hard pressed to change that. And they're just going to fight a lot with the system to try and make it happen. So, you know, it really is, it's a very challenging dynamic, but we have been working with really great partners at the state and at the universities and in among service providers and in clerks of court and in DSS offices all over the state for 8 years. Holy moly, 8 years. We have been working with these good folks to figure out what the next iteration of our guardianship system should be. And the result of that is a bill that I'm very proud of, and that is working its way through the General Assembly right now. And I'm going to pull it up for you. I'm going to pull it up for you if I can get Zoom to let me share again. There we go. Okay. So this is Senate Bill 308. Senate Bill 308 is sponsored by several folks who care deeply about people with disabilities, and particularly people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities. It was first introduced in March. That's why I scrolled down here. I wanted to actually use this as an example to walk you through how to learn about a bill. So when you search for a bill by the bill number, this is the kind of page that you pull up. This is how you can learn more about the bills that you care about at the General Assembly. So you can look at a bill digest, which will take a second to load, so I'll let that do its thing. But the bill digest gives you the School of Government summary and some information and context about the bill. You can also get the different versions or editions of the bill. So you can see here that it was filed and then has had three subsequent editions, the most recent of which is available right here. These will pull up as PDF files that you can download and use for anything you need. They are, let's see. They are just basically red lines. So they underline text that's being added, and then there is strike through for any language, like the word proceeding at the bottom of page 3, for example. They strike through words that are deleted and underline words that are added. So that's how you read it, and it tells you what section at the beginning of each section of the bill. So section 1.2, it tells you what section of the North Carolina General Statutes it's amending. So you can go and look and read that section of the statutes to see what's being changed, what the current language is and what's being changed. This bill really is a very modest step forward, but I think an important one. It would make very clear that if a person's needs are being met in some way other than through guardianship, that guardianship is not necessary, which seems obvious, but it was not at all obvious under present law. And so I'm very excited at the potential for this to be enacted, because it will really help clerks of court, guardians ad litem, families, people with disabilities navigate this process so much better. It also really fleshes out less restrictive Sorry, it's late in the day, so my speech is a little garbled. Less restrictive alternative. An arrangement enabling a respondent to manage his or her affairs, or to make or communicate important decisions concerning his or her person, property, and family that restricts fewer rights of the respondent than would the adjudication of incompetency and appointment of a guardian. The term includes supported decision-making, appropriate and available technological assistance, appointment of a representative payee, and appointment of an agent by the respondent, including appointment under a power of attorney for healthcare or power of attorney for finances. So this really just spells out, like, this is when we say less restrictive alternative, this is what we're talking about. If you can do it and interfere with people's rights less, let's do it that way. And making an explicit preference, for those less restrictive alternatives inside of the guardianship statute is a huge step forward. And I'm very excited about it. And Annette, I can't begin to explain the motivations of the amendment sponsors that decided to merge it with firearm permits. So I'll just say I won't pontificate, but that's recent. We didn't write that part. The other thing that I think is really significant in this bill is that it would improve the notice provisions to respondents, and it would also improve notification of rights. So down here under section 3.7, which would modify section 35A-1117, notice of rights of respondent. This does not add or subtract any rights. This is just explaining what rights the person under guardianship would have before and after adjudication of incompetence. So what are their rights during the court process, and what are their rights if they are adjudicated incompetent? What rights do they lose or retain? And spell it out so that there's an opportunity for a person with a disability who is a respondent to really grasp what's going on here, right? Because usually the effort to create a guardianship is because of, well, not usually, often the effort to create a guardianship is the result of some kind of crisis, decline in health, some sort of poor financial decision-making or dangerous behavior, or, there's usually an incident that gives rise to the petition for incompetency and guardianship. And there isn't always a fuller look at the consequences. And, people are trying to solve a problem and may not really have anyone to advise them about the full context of what this particular solution to that problem entails. And I think that the rights of respondents section here really is super helpful, because it's going to help petitioners, family members, guardians ad litem, respondents, clerks of court, all know better what to do and what the actual decision is that you're making, right? So I'm incredibly excited about this. There is still one amendment pending, but it's on the House calendar. In fact, I don't know, it could be being heard right this minute. I'm not sure if they've recessed for the evening. They hadn't when I joined you all. Are there questions about the guardianship bill? Or about why we are working on improving our guardianship procedures generally? If the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And that is absolutely, absolutely right. And that's, you know, these are good people all over the state. We're all doing our best on a day-to-day basis. And really, we're just hoping to get better information in the hands of all the people involved and really make sure that people with disabilities are at the center of the decision-making here. And that if there's a less restrictive way to meet their needs, that we do it, right? It's a big deal to have a judge say that another human being's judgment, decision making should be substituted for your own. And I think, and I want to be really clear, any one of us could be subject to a guardianship tomorrow, right? We are all one car accident, one serious illness away from a guardianship petition. And so I think we should all take some comfort in knowing that there are going to be additional protections and safeguards for the rights of respondents to these petitions, because, you know, just as often as respondents are people with IDD, they are people who have been in a motor vehicle collision, or people who have, you know, I had a client who was a pedestrian hit by a car and had a severe traumatic brain injury from which she recovered. She didn't recover 100%, but she recovered like 85%. That's pretty great. And so she was restored to competency and was no longer under guardianship after a period of time. So, you know, we should all feel better knowing that these safeguards are headed into law, and my fingers are crossed they are passed into law very soon, and that we can start operating a more we can start operating a more thoughtful guardianship system very, very soon. And so there are a couple of questions. Annette says she knows families whose parental rights were taken away by a rogue clerk of court. Yes, because when you petition for guardianship, you might not get it. Someone else might. It might be the DSS. It might be your sister. It might be someone completely different. So you are really handing over a major family decision to a relative stranger when you petition for guardianship. And I think many people really don't understand how much that can change their lives. And Beth asks, at what age should guardianship be considered? Maybe never. It depends on the needs of the individual. Guardianship is only there to provide a decision maker where the person with a disability cannot be the decision maker. And so, so for many people, it's never. And for some people, it's at 99, right? I hope that for people with IDD, we have now dispelled the myth that you must get guardianship at 18 in order to continue to participate in healthcare and educational decision-making. That is absolutely not true. All you need is a consent to continue to participate in educational and healthcare decision-making. People without disabilities have a third party involved in their educational and healthcare decision-making all the time. Most school systems now have a form that is just a consent to parental involvement that the student just needs to sign. That's it. And it used to be that was a major way that people with IDD ended up under guardianship before anyone ever really examined what their needs were, just because they were turning 18 and some school official said, you got to get guardianship or we can't talk to you anymore. That's not true. We have some great resources on our website about guardianships and how to create limited guardianships, alternatives to guardianship, and also how to end a guardianship. If anyone needs those resources, they're on our website. And I would also highly recommend the rethinkingguardianship.org website, which is the website of the collective impact work group initially funded by the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities that really led to the creation of this legislation. That's the group I mentioned that's been working together for 8 years now. And I'm very, very proud of the changes in our system in that time. I am proud that we have cleared the queue of questions, but that doesn't mean you can't ask anymore. I will say that the guardianship bill has been through the Senate, 0 problems, and is up for consideration in the House. I think I might have actually said this already tonight, but they could have considered it tonight, although I think I would have more text on my phone if they had. They will probably put it on the calendar for their next session, which if they're not taking any votes for 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know when that will be. But whenever they come back to do a budget, we should get a guardianship bill. And I'm really excited about that because that will be a huge step forward and something I have worked on for the majority of my time at Disability Rights North Carolina. So it will feel like a big weight lifted to get that over the finish line.
Well, I hope you can see me. I'm trying the technology on the screen as we're supposed to be doing. And there is one comment, and it's from Carol, and she says, "Thanks, Corey." And
Thanks,
I do want to say thank you, Corey. You speak I can't speak effortlessly. You speak
There's nothing effortless at 9 p.m.
You speak effortlessly about all of these very important, issues. And I do know that we could sit here and talk about these all night long. And I want to thank you for your time, and not just your time, is you speak very intentionally. And it means a lot to people, especially me, when I'm listening and you're not just rushing through the information, and you're a wealth of knowledge. And I really do appreciate you sharing your time with us tonight. I do think we could go on and on and on about all these issues. I do want to stress to everyone that, just as someone asked about the IDD Caucus, and the IDD Caucus is a group of North Carolina state legislators from both parties, from both chambers, and they are mostly new. And one of the things that's very important is it's not just the IDD caucus members, but all the legislators. Unless someone has a personal lived experience, such as being a parent or a sibling of a person with a disability, they really are clueless as to what our life is like. And as Corey mentioned, the things that the legislators are talking about and debating and making decisions, are not important to them, that are important to us. And I say this very often, is people with IDD and Down syndrome, we are not even an afterthought to our legislators. An afterthought would be, someone came up with an idea, they went ahead with it. And then as they're rolling it out, someone said, "Hey, what about, people with Down syndrome or IDD?" That would be an afterthought. Usually what tends to happen is someone comes up with a great idea, they fund it, they roll it out, it's going along great. And then there's somebody over here who says, "Hey, what about people with extra chromosomes?" And they're like, "What are you talking about? What's an extra chromosome?"
Who are they?
So I know I'm making light of it, but these are the people who are making the decisions, and they have no concept of who we are and what our family's needs are. So any opportunity you have I encourage you to contact your legislators and their legislative assistants. And the website that Corye shared with you up in the top right-hand corner, it says, "Who's my legislator?" And you can click on that, put in your address. It's kind of freaky. It'll show you a map of your neighborhood and where your house is. But send them an email. And it doesn't have to be more than, I live in your district. I have a 22-year-old son who has Down syndrome. He has been on the Registry of Development Needs. This is the North Carolina Innovation Waiver wait list for services that will support him. And he's been on that list since July 2012. I'd love to have a conversation with you about what having that waiver slot would mean to our family, or what not having that waiver slot means to our family. You know, you are the expert when it comes to your loved one, and it's important for you to share that information with our legislators. And you have my email address because you got the link. So if you have any information on how to become that spokesperson, that advocate for your child, please do email me. I'm happy to talk about that all day long. And one of the things I want to bring up that, you know, Corye is very passionate about the guardianship, and it's scary for parents, especially parents of children with Down syndrome. We think we're going to protect our child with guardianship. And the sad truth is, regardless of what type of guardianship you have, nothing's going to protect our children. It's the world we live in. So I really hope, you know, and this is full disclosure, you know, I have guardianship of the person, but they scare you into doing this. And so I'm hoping that this legislation is a step in the right direction, and that maybe we can get more protections for people with IDD out there. So we need less restrictive covenants over them. But that, I don't want to get on Corye's soapbox tonight, because she deserves all the, you know, her and disability rights.
We can devote an entire evening to guardianship if anyone will let me.
Well, I have written here, do I really need guardianship, as another workshop that I'd like to do. But several people have posted in the Q&A thanking you tonight, Corye. I really appreciate your time. I look forward to continuing these conversations. I want to thank everyone for hanging in with us on their Wednesday evening, instead of being outside in what 90 or 95 degree temperature. I know a lot of people have participated in this webinar tonight that does not have a loved one with Down syndrome, and I appreciate the disability community to sharing this information far and wide. And I'd like to let you know that we have several topics coming up that are not Down syndrome specific. September is talking about the North Carolina Innovation Waiver, the wait list, and what to do in the interim. October is ABLE accounts and special needs trusts, and November will be technology and apps for everyday living. So I welcome everyone to come back. It is information that NCDSA feels is important for people to have, and the more people that have this information, the better off our loved ones will be. Again, you will be receiving an email with a quick survey about tonight, and then next week you will be receiving the follow-up email with links to the videos and Corye's PowerPoint. So with that, again, Corye, thank you very much, and good night to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week. Corye, thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.